Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Hi, you're joining us I am in cloudy Oxford at the moment. It's definitely not as sunny as it was this time last week, which is fine because last week was maybe a bit too much. How about you, Philip? What's it like where you are?
Actually, I'm in London and it's actually pretty nice. We've got a bit of sun, a bit of a breeze, so it's pretty nice, pretty balmy.
Yeah, that sounds like the perfect balance. So welcome to our live Q&A today. So I'm here with writer and also ultimate novel writing course tutor for Jericho writers, Philip Womack. Thank you so much for joining us today, Philip. He's here to answer any of your questions that you might have about writing, about getting published, even if you're just curious about Philip's work itself. Do just drop any questions you have into the comments and we will do our very best to answer those for you. So fab. So as we get started, I'll just give you a little bit of a background into Philip and his work, just in case you're not familiar with it already. So Philip is the author of 8 critically acclaimed fantasy books for children. His latest, Wildlaw, was released in October 2021, available in all the places you can buy books, so do go and check that out if you've not read it already, because it's wonderful. His first work of non-fiction for adults, How to Teach Classics to Your Dog, was published in 2020. It's a lively guide to the world and literature of the ancient Greeks and Romans. So if you're interested in that kind of classical mythology, I think that's a perfect jumping off point if you're not that knowledgeable about those worlds already. Write Your Own Myths, a creative writing guide for children, also was released last year. And Philip also writes reviews for national newspapers, including the Times Literary Supplement, the Financial Times, the Spectator, and the Literary Review. And you've also been an editor and mentor with us for many years, and as well as being one of our Ultimate Novel course writing tutors. So we're really thrilled that we're able to work with you, Philip, and thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Yeah.
Great. So I thought let's just kind of jump into it a bit, because when you are a tutor on the course, you obviously you work with students from quite a few different backgrounds and who are writing in very kind of different styles and different genres. But obviously your kind of focus in your own career is obviously you've written a lot of books for children, and I think kind of like those kind of fantasy and mythology tropes often, are very informative to your own work. But how do you kind of go about deciding if it's going to be a good relationship when you're considering mentoring somebody, even if their work is very different to your own?
That's a good question. And what I've been really excited about over the past 2 years, because I have taught on the course since its inception, which was 2 years ago, and we've had a huge range of people on the course with a huge range of talent, all very, very good. We only accept people who are of a certain standard, which is great. But what I'm really looking for is the sense of a story, and the sense of how a story can be laid out in a narrative. I think a lot of people have very, very good ideas, and they have a lot of imagination, but sometimes they need a bit of guidance in terms of structure, in terms of plot, and also in terms of character. I think those are the things that people find the hardest to do, and they are the hardest things to do. So what I look for really is that energy, that sense of a very strong idea that you can work with, that can be sort of
Oh, sorry, I think we might have just lost Philip for a second there. I think we're having a few connection issues, so do bear with us. He's back. Sorry.
Am I back?
You're back.
Things are difficult. I think so. You come with an idea, and that's great too, because then you can work with plotting out that idea, plotting out the characters, plotting out the setting, and working on it from that level. Some people come with a third draft, and that's good. That's also good. So the nice thing about it is that you develop a relationship with each student, which is individual. You look at their needs, you look at what they want, how best they can approach their novels, and it's really nice seeing those novels come to fruition. And at the moment on the course, a lot of mine are finishing their manuscripts, and it's been great seeing them all come together. So
that's fantastic. I guess it'd just be interesting to kind of know, you've spoken about that you kind of champion consistent, thoughtful feedback. And I think often many writers kind of, I think, it is important to be able to write alone, but I think it's also really helpful when you can get that kind of third party feedback and support either from a mentor or, from your peers. So why do you think that kind of, constant level of feedback and support is important throughout the writing process?
I think it's so. Zadie Smith said something like along the lines of, what you want when you're sending out your work is the intelligent reader. You want somebody who's got, because often if you've written a manuscript, you give it to your friend or your neighbor or I don't know, the lollipop lady or something, and obviously your neighbor will say, well, I liked it, but then won't necessarily have the tools to tell you what was wrong with it or what needed work. And quite often people feel an emotional connection to you, so they're not going to want to upset you. So I think what's very, very useful, and I think it's also important to add at this point that all writers go through an editorial process. So even if you are a very successful writer on his or her 19th book, that book will still go through a process of being read by somebody else, by being read by an editor, and being read by a copy editor. So there will be input at every level of that manuscript. So this is a kind of the stage before that. And I always see it as a way of actually getting used to the kind of professional world of publishing, where you will have comments, you will have people chiming in and saying, actually, this doesn't work, or this does work, or can you make this stronger here, or, maybe cut this character. So I think it is very useful to have that. And also, I think what I think the course really does provide, which is useful, is the sort of guidance, the sense of guidance, like you can bounce ideas off, because who's got a sort of sense of the publishing world, because it is quite bewildering when you're coming into it from outside, and particularly bewildering if you come from a different profession, because a lot of people come on the course, having been worked in all sorts of things. I mean, there's people from all walks of life on the course this year, and I think that's really great, because I think writers should come from everywhere. And it can be, if you're really good at something and then you come into writing and suddenly you come up against this wall of kind of jargon and publishing stuff that people seem to know about like it's a big mystery. So it's quite useful to have somebody who can kind of explain that to you and say, well, actually, this is how it works, and this is what will happen. So I think it's quite it's good in that sense to have a kind of guide through it, which is how I see the mentor role.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of an invaluable experience. Like you said, it's really helping to prepare people, especially if they are a first-time author, into getting thrown into the world of publishing, which can be quite, I guess, a shock if you're not sure what to expect, or you've not kind of been in that kind of environment before. So it's really helping to kind of like ease writers into it a bit, or set them up for success, really.
It teaches you how to take constructive feedback thoughtfully, and how to address it to your manuscript, because that is what editors do. An editor in a publishing house will read your manuscript and then say, well, actually, can you get rid of the scene? This character doesn't work. So it's the same kind of thing. It's the same kind of process, really.
Yeah, for sure. We've had a question coming in from Karen. Hi, Karen. Thanks so much for joining us. So Karen's just asked, how has your editing process developed, and how many people usually read your drafts and contribute useful comments?
That's a very good question. And I have, in fact, I just, in the sequel to Wild Lord, which is hopefully coming out next year if I finish it, it's the first time I've had a teenage girl as a protagonist. So I asked the girl next door to read it, just from the point of view of a teenage girl, and see whether I'd kind of got it right. So that was very, very useful in terms of kind of what a teenage girl might actually do, on her phone and that sort of thing. So usually I have one or two kind of quite trusted readers, very old friends who I know will tell me when something doesn't work. And because it's quite a big thing to ask somebody to read a manuscript, which is take them 3 days or something. But I've got a couple of friends who were quite happy to do that. And then after they've read it, I will then. I myself am on my 4th draft of the new book, and I'm planning to finish that by the end of August, and then I'll leave it for 2 weeks. Then I'll do another draft, and then I'll kind of potentially send it in to my editors. So the editing process has developed over the years. In that, I've become much more aware of the need to edit. I used, as a young writer, have this very romantic idea about the connection between the brain and the page and how it just should kind of all come out. But that's, you do need to sort of take a step back and refine and look at the words on the page very, very carefully. I think Sally Gardner, who's a wonderful, actually both Sally and Meg Rossoff, who are both wonderful children's authors, and both of them gave me very, very similar advice, which was that every single word on the page has to carry weight, and that there can't be anything on there that's excessive. And I've always tried to kind of pay attention to that.
Yeah, so you go through quite a rigorous editing process yourself then before you even send it into your editor, which I think is really interesting. I think, again, a lot of, especially new writers might not consider, they would think, oh, we'll just, it'll be fine, and then we'll go through the editing process once they start working with the editor. But sometimes it's really helpful to kind of, like you're doing, just take that step back and then go back and look at it again with kind of more fresh eyes. So, and
I think also in terms of the industry, a lot of agents are now doing a layer of editing, which wasn't necessarily the case when I started out. What tends to happen now is that the agent will want to give a book that's absolutely as good as it can be to an editor. So there'll be even another layer of editing that goes in before then.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think useful for people to know. Thank you so much for your question, Karen. She's also just commented that she found with editing, the more she learns about it, the more she realizes she doesn't know as much about writing and editing as she thought she did. So I think we all feel that way. Writing is just a continuous ongoing learning journey, isn't it? And I don't think you ever get to a point where you know everything. But I think that's where it kind of comes in useful to have people like yourself helping other writers and having mentors to kind of assist you along your way. Hopefully it helps shorten that journey a little bit. But yeah, thank you so much, Karen. So I guess kind of leading on to that, I'm just really curious to know how you kind of approach a new project. Kind of how do you get the ideas, and kind of how do you kind of kickstart it on the page?
So that is a very interesting question, and I think each book is different. So sometimes it can be a scrap of information, or a word or a phrase or an image that I build on, or two images that come together. So I think I'll try and give you three concise examples. And so for the double axe, which was a sort of reimagining of the Minotaur story. So obviously the kind of structure of the story was already there. So I used it and built upon it through the character of one of the children of King Minos in his voice. So that was quite straightforward. I mean, obviously, I played with a few things in the narrative, but it kind of essentially wrote itself, because there's only sort of one ending. You just kind of play with it. And then with the Arrow of Apollo, again, because it was based on the structures of myth, you kind of think about the logical extensions of those myths and how they might move forwards. And so that's what I used for that. But then with Wildlord, that was very different, and that came about more through setting and through this image of a house that had a moat around it, and a mound that is obviously, in my imagination, connected to a different world, and how these two things kind of work together. So, and then it was just a question of how, I can never remember, this is so embarrassing, I can never remember who actually said this, but somebody said that there are only two kinds of stories. One is a stranger arrives in town, and the other one is somebody leaves town. And so it was just a question of, here's the place, here's the house. So we need a stranger to come into it to kind of, stir. So it's that kind of thing, really. It's kind of quite often you have a situation that needs stirring up, and it's kind of working out how you sort of set that catalyst going, get that what they call in the film world the inciting incident, how you cause the story to start.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's a really great quote. I'm going to have to look that up because I've not heard that before, but I think it makes so much sense. It's so true.
Well, the other way of looking at it is it's either the Iliad or the Odyssey. It's either the besieged town or it's the person going out into the world. So it's either inside or out. But it's easy when you say it like that.
Yeah. I mean, it is really interesting how, you do kind of look back at those, classical stories and how well they've stood the test of time, and, how kind of they have kind of formed like the archetypes of our storytelling in a way. And is that something why you were kind of drawn to writing, influenced by like?
I think so, absolutely. I mean, I was interested in myth and legend, and I had read all sorts of myths and legends as a child. I mean, it wasn't just Greek myth; it was Norse myth. It was the Andrew Lang fairy books, which I'm sure many people will be familiar with. And it's just the structure of those myths obviously is so tight. I always think of the myth of Perseus and how every single scene in the myth slots into a kind of overarching pattern, and then even at the end when Perseus returns and he fulfills the prophecy accidentally, so there's always this sense of structure and movement within them, which I think is really brilliant, and it does say something about why we like stories and how we need them to have structure and what they say to us over the centuries, why it's important for us to have these very tight beginnings, middles and ends, and what it so that's why I think you sort of want to work with that and sort of understand how stories work.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess it's kind of interesting, like just again, like hearing about your approach and how you write a novel and kind of the things, I guess there are different ways in, but then you kind of do have to be able to kind of, master all those like key components, coming down to like plot and then coming down to, forming believable characters, and then, really refining your voice as well. There's so many different elements that kind of go into it. And in your writing experience, was that something that you found you kind of were able to kind of like develop on your own, or was it something that you received kind of any kind of inspiration from other writers in terms of how you approach doing that?
Yeah, I think it's a mixture. I think that as a writer, certainly I am a sponge and kind of soak up anything. Any. I mean, we're very, very lucky in the world of children's books at the moment because there are so many excellent writers out there, and really stylish, brilliant writers. I mean, I could list a dozen at Marcus Sedgwick, who's actually on the other course. That's why. Sally Gardner, as I mentioned, Meg Rossoff, they're all brilliant writers, and you read their books and you think, well, I want to do that, I want to write like them, but at the same time you also want to develop your own voice that's kind of distinct from that. So you sort of look at what they're doing and you think, gosh, I'll never be able to do that, and then you kind of think, well, actually I can try, and then each book is an attempt to work out how you're going to do it, and then eventually you settle into something that is your own and is very distinctive.
Yeah.
Yeah,
no, it definitely is. I mean, I guess it would be kind of interesting, I guess, to kind of flip it. So when you're looking at someone else's work, are there kind of any key things, that you're looking for, and all things that stand out to you that I guess, make the work enticing to you, or make you want to kind of read on? What kind of things like draw you in
a published novel or in a
I would both.
So I think for me it's always style. I think I obsess about style. If you come on the course you'll find that I'm still talking about it, but I think style is something that is not necessarily not given as much attention as it should be, and I think style and voice are really closely interlinked, and I think having that idiosyncratic style which gives a worldview that is kind of compelling or unusual is I think brilliant. And then there's the Sally's a really good example of that, Sally Gardner, and so is Meg Rostov. I mean, that voice and How I Live Now is just incredibly distinctive. It's even something like Salinger with Catcher in the Rye. He was one of the first people to do that, to kind of try and get that voice on the page. And then it's the kind of elements, the building blocks of the story, and so Cressida Cowell does it in How to Train Your Dragon over 12 books. Each book, each chapter, each character has a function in the story. It's so beautifully planned, but at the same time, it's emotionally charged. So it doesn't feel formulaic, even though she's using the building blocks, very, very basic story building blocks, and you can see them. But it's the emotional and human level that comes through her characters, which is so brilliant. So I guess it's a mixture of the two things. It's style and storytelling that I really look for.
Yeah, and I think that's, you can't really have one do one well without the other to create, a great book. I think you do have to really, perfect them both as much as possible.
I'm always talking about Jane Austen in the course, because I think I think the 18th century, if you want to, be interested in style, I think it's no worse place to start than the 18th and 19th centuries, early 19th, late 18th, early 19th, and just, look at those sentences. So ultimately it comes down to the sentence on the page and the weight that sentence carries and how the words move and the sort of, the structure of the sentence itself, like structure, sentence structure, paragraph structure, chapter structure is so important, and the movement through them. So start small.
Just small things that you just need to master, really. But no, it's so important, and I think that's again something that it really helps when you are able to find someone who is able to mentor you through the process or offer you kind of advice on how to master that as best you can. I think that always is really helpful. I'm curious to know why you enjoy mentoring other authors so much. And
I think it's really fruitful relationship where you can offer help to somebody who needs it, and it's very pleasing when you see people learning and growing and understanding. And it's certainly on both courses that I've been mentoring on. I've seen huge changes, very positive changes in all of the students who kind of start. Sometimes, someone might start with a scrap of an idea, and on the course that I've just taught, someone came with an outline, and it's now got a really, really strong first draft of a novel. It's very strong. It's full of ideas. It's very stylishly written. And then there was somebody who came with, I think, a third draft, and that novel is now even better. It's really tight. It's kind of really it moves really well. It's very, very gripping. So it's nice seeing people respond to suggestions, because ultimately all a mentor can sort of do is suggest. You're not you're not telling, you're suggesting, and so the writer has to go away. The mentee goes away and thinks about it, and then you might think, well, actually, that point isn't right, but this point is, and I can kind of apply that to my own work. So it is nice to see that kind of absorption of what's been taught and the kind of application of it.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I know the students on the courses, get so much out of that. So it's really lovely as well when you also see the students to kind of go on after the course and find their success. We've had students go on to get their manuscripts listed by agents, or even then go on to get publishing deals. So it's really fantastic to see. I think just like one final question, because I know we're running out of time and we have to wrap up. But just, in case people are watching and they're thinking about applying to the course. We've just got a quick question in from Glenna. Do you have time to just answer that one for us quickly? Fab. So Glenn has just asked, if I want to write a trilogy, would you suggest writing all 3 novels if you're trying to get a representation?
That's a good question, Glenn. That is a tricky one. I think if I were writing a trilogy, which I have done, I think you wouldn't necessarily have to write them all, but I would definitely write the first one and then very, very tightly outline the second and the third. Because the thing about trilogies is that actually they are quite hard to sell, because and what happens with any series of books is that the first one always sells the most, and then the second one will sell half as much as the first one, and the third one will sell half as much as the second one. And that's just, it just seems to be a kind of iron law of trilogies. So in order to, even I'm willing to bet that even something like kind of, J.R.R. Tolkien, the first one will be the one that's always, the one that sells, because often people just fall away, they don't get to number 2 and 3. And the idea, of course, is then that the first one basically pays for the second and the third, because everyone will buy the first one, and then they might come to the second or the third or not. So what I would do is have a very, very strong idea of what the trilogy is doing, how each book feeds into the next, and have a kind of very strong, like a question that's asked in the first book that can only be answered once they've gone through into the third book. So the kind of your hero or heroine who's kind of given a task in the first book, and then there has to be something that surprises us, and kind of, usually the thing about a trilogy is that it has to have some kind of cosmic. I'm assuming this is fantasy. The final book has to have some kind of cosmic resonance where the kind of the kind of protagonist has undertaken a task that somehow makes the world a better place through that one single task. So if you can think about that, how that kind of pans out over three novels, then that would be great. So do the first one, do a really tight plan for the second and third. Maybe even for the second book, do a kind of a synopsis of each chapter or something like that, and then outline the third. But I wouldn't say you have to write all 3.
Oh, that was really useful. Thank you. I'd never really thought of that before, but it's so true. I guess, it's quite a task to go about writing all 3 books, and then just to get to the end and someone said, actually, can you go back to the beginning and then change all this? So I think, that makes a lot of sense. That was a great question, Glenn, and thank you so much for asking. Okay, well, we're running out of time, so I'll just quickly ask you, Philip, before we go. So in case people are looking to apply to the Ultimate Novel Writing course, which you are a tutor on for Jericho writers, at what stage in people's writing journeys do you think people need to be on? You've mentioned already you do work with people at various different stages. So if someone's, has just like a general idea of it, or a rough idea in their head of what they want their book to be, is it still okay for them to go ahead and apply?
I think you can apply at any stage. I think you need to have some quite strong idea of where you want to go. I think sometimes people come with 2 or 3 ideas. That's fine, because part of the process is working out which one might be the one to work on. And I think so the way the course is structured is sort of a bit like an MA, where each month there's a specific task or sort of subject. So you've got kind of the standard ones you'd expect, like plot, character, and so forth. But then the overarching idea is that so obviously you read the information and you do the tasks, but the overarching idea is that you just carry on writing your book. And so that if you're starting from scratch, that's fine, because then you can set yourself limits of kind of, I've got to do my 3,000 words this month, next month. So then by the end of it, you have 10,000 words or more. If you've been, sorry, I can't do maths at this time of day, 30,000 words or more. And then obviously there's more time to write, so you can kind of have your manuscript done. And if you've already come with a draft, then you use the time to edit. So you can go back and rewrite your chapters. You can so any stage really, I think is fine.
Great. Well, that's reassuring to know, I think. And so, if you are interested in learning more about the course, I've got the link to our website at the bottom of the screen. I'll also pop it into the comments for you. And do choose Philip as your mentor if you've enjoyed our conversation today and enjoyed what we had to say. He's really fantastic. So, you're making a great choice. But I think this has just been a really useful opportunity for people to kind of learn more about about your work, but also, you know, helping them along in their own writing process. So thank you again so much, Philip. This has been really great. And yeah, and then hopefully we'll be able to bring you some more of these conversations soon. So do follow our channels if you're not already. Hopefully we'll be able to have Philip back at some point as well. So yeah, this has been lovely. Thank you everyone for joining us, and we'll speak to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.